Welcome back, everybody. Let's take a look at the next lesson, which is defining schema from an external table or schema feature. So one of the things which I mentioned earlier is that you can use, say, an Excel spreadsheet as your schema document with a resource reader. But one of the limitations of doing that is that things like geometry, they don't exist in an Excel spreadsheet. So how could we still use an Excel spreadsheet to define our schema, but also include the geometry? And we can do that by using a table-based schema. Now, this is not specifically using the Excel reader, so we would not add this as an Excel reader resource. Instead, it will be a schema from table reader. The schema from table reader can read from a couple of different formats. I believe Excel is just one of them. It could also read it from, let's see, what are the limitations on that? Main resource reader. Schema, oh, we can do it schema any format, schema from table. And let's see what we can use here. Oh, looks like it has might have a fair bit of flexibility here. I'm pretty sure Excel and CSV would both be supported, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So I might have to play around with that a little bit to find out what formats are actually supported by the schema from table. That's probably in the documentation. I'll look that up during the break. So what the table looks like is what we have here. This would be inside of the Excel spreadsheet. We have defined a feature type column, attribute name column, attribute data type column, geometry type, and attribute order. So we can control all of those. So for each basically feature here, we have the name of the feature type, the attribute name for this particular attribute, the attribute type. The geometry type could really be, I believe, anywhere. Here it's first. I'm not sure if it has to be first. It just has to be associated at some point with the feature type here. And then we have the attribute numbers. This is the order, controlling the order on the output. In the question that we had earlier, it was controlling the column order, and that's how this is done. These names here, they don't have to be specifically these names. When you are configuring this particular reader, we do have the columns that you can set. So the feature type, here we've just named them like that because it's convenient, but you could have completely different things here. This allows you to reuse, or well, maybe name them something that makes more sense within your organization. I wouldn't say that you could use just any other document without editing it. You'll notice that the attribute data types, these are FME specific, but you can change the order, and yeah, so it will read it in, and then you can use that schema source or that resource as your schema source. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is that I can actually create that schema table pretty much on the fly by using a schema feature. There are some readers which will automatically create a schema feature. There have been times where I've just used a creator and then an attribute manager and created the schema feature manually. The schema feature is a single feature. It looks similar in concept to that table. Just keep in mind that it's one feature, so everything's being stored as a list. So the schema feature is something which I quite like about the feature reader. You don't get schema features directly from a normal reader. However, the schema scanner transformer, which we'll be seeing in the next course, that will also create that schema feature. So here we can see constructing a schema feature using an attribute manager. So we just basically create each element of the list manually. So we have the attribute, FME data type, attribute name, and it goes on from there. And then on the output, instead of specifying that we want to read the schema from that schema table resource reader, instead we can say that the schema comes from a schema feature. Schema features are specifically flagged with being a schema feature. So when they get to the writer won't try to write that schema feature to your output data set. Instead, it will try to use that to define your output data set. Let's see here. Here's a list of the valid data types for your schema feature. These FME field types, these will be mapped automatically to something equivalent for your output format. And someone had a question, was a proper practice to visualize a resource reader on a workspace to be visible by coworkers? Visualize resource reader on a workspace to be visible by coworkers. If you wanted coworkers to be able to edit that resource reader, if you want them to get access to that resource, you could put that onto a network drive, or you could use a format which is basically shared to the outside world. For my own work, I've used Google Sheets for that, or as I mentioned before, JSON files or CSV files or any other file in GitHub. That would also work if that's what you mean. Or do you want to inspect what is in there? If I have a workspace resource here, I'm just going to grab something random. Can I inspect that? Should have picked a smaller file. Okay, so I've added that resource reader. If you want to point out that you're using that, yeah, inserting annotation onto the canvas would be one way of doing that. I don't believe we can attach annotation to objects in the navigator. That's not a current capability. If I want to inspect this, if I right click here, I can view the source data, so I can inspect it directly. Making it visible to coworkers, I'm not quite sure. The feature reader and the schema feature, yeah, that would work. Visible as a reader. I'm just not sure what you mean by visible. Oh, do you mean like a parameter, a user parameter? So, I mean, the source here, I mean, that could be linked to a user parameter if that's what you're looking for, so that people are prompted to supply that. If that's what you're looking for, then yes, you could just add it as a user parameter. Okay. So that is define schema from an external table or schema feature. So please review the lesson, and we'll continue at 10:35.